Jerusalem, undeniably the most venerated sacred city on the globe. Boasting a past that spans nearly 5 millennia, it has stood as the focal point for 3 of humanity's principal faiths, with Jews, Christians, and Muslims all asserting their rights to this holy metropolis. This has, perhaps predictably, led to Jerusalem becoming one of the most contested and battled-over locations on Earth. The city has been the crown jewel of various empires, kingdoms, and spiritual movements throughout the centuries, resulting in it exchanging governance no fewer than 40 times. The consequences born from these ancient grievances continue to scar Jerusalem well into the 21st century. But how did this urban center, which started as merely a small habitation near a water source, transform into one of the most religiously and politically explosive sites in existence? This is the story of how Jerusalem ascended to become the world's holiest city. The earliest chronicles of Jerusalem reach back to 3000 BC, when the settlement's cornerstones were laid beside the Gihon Spring. This vital aquatic resource permitted Jerusalem's original residents to convert an otherwise desolate and dry terrain into a place that would eventually become a globally significant city. By approximately 2000 BC, Jerusalem was situated just outside the periphery of the Middle Egyptian kingdom. It was during this era that the first known written reference to the town, Rusalamum, appeared in their records. The site itself was inhabited by the Canaanites, who constructed formidable stone ramparts around their community to safeguard their precious water supply. By 1500 BC, the city fell under the dominion of the Egyptian New Kingdom as a vassal territory, becoming part of an empire that extended from the Sahara to the edges of modern-day Turkey. However, Egyptian influence began to wane by the 12th century BC during an epoch known as the Late Bronze Age collapse. This period witnessed many civilizations across the Eastern Mediterranean spiral into a swift and frequently violent downfall. In the aftermath, numerous smaller sovereign kingdoms emerged in the region. Among them were the Israelites, a Canaanite subgroup who, according to biblical law, were commanded by King David and came to control Jerusalem by 1000 BC, establishing it as the capital of the Kingdom of Israel. Under the rule of David's heir, King Solomon, a magnificent sanctuary, later identified as the Temple of Solomon, was built within the metropolis, cementing its standing as a primary cultural and spiritual hub for what would develop into the Jewish faith. Within 100 years, however, the Kingdom of Israel bifurcated. The northern section maintained its own governance, while the southern portion became the Kingdom of Judah, retaining Jerusalem as its capital. Over the ensuing 4 centuries, Jerusalem matured as the heart of Jewish theology and tradition, though it endured regular assaults from its mightier neighbors, specifically the Egyptian and Assyrian empires, who competed for regional supremacy. Then, in the 6th century BC, Jerusalem underwent the first of many critical shifts in power. The Babylonians, successors to the Assyrians in the area, were led by King Nebuchadnezzar II. Seeking to broaden his domain, he effectively surrounded and captured Jerusalem in 597 BC. Despite seizing the city, the Babylonians encountered substantial defiance from the local Jewish populace, which eventually sparked a rebellion barely a decade later in 587 BC. Retaliating, Nebuchadnezzar besieged the city again and decimated much of it, including Solomon's temple. This act of vengeance was compounded by his decree to expel the Jewish residents, who were subsequently banished to Babylonian territories in the east. Jerusalem remained under Babylonian control for 40 years until it was assimilated by the rapidly growing Achaemenid Empire under King Cyrus the Great. Cyrus permitted numerous banished Jews to journey back to Jerusalem and reconstruct the city and its temple. Over the next 2 centuries, additional waves of returning exiles and their progeny repopulated Jerusalem. Yet they did not hold sovereign power over the city. In 332 BC, custody of Jerusalem shifted once more when Alexander the Great seized it during his campaign against the Persians. Alexander's dominion over the vast empire he carved out was brief, and following his demise in 323 BC, his lands were partitioned among his generals. Jerusalem first fell under the Ptolemaic dynasty of Egypt, but after centuries of relentless conflict, it passed to the Seleucids in 198 BC. Beginning under Alexander and continuing through Ptolemaic and Seleucid governance, many Jews in Jerusalem adopted aspects of Greek culture. However, this drift from traditional practices eventually incited unrest, which erupted in the 160s BC into a revolt led by a group called the Maccabees. They retook Jerusalem in 164 BC and reinstated Jewish rights at the Temple, a victory commemorated today during Hanukkah. Following the Maccabean revolt, Jerusalem served as the capital of a semi-autonomous zone and later the fully independent Hasmonean kingdom, which endured for over a century. This era of autonomy ended in 37 BC with the ascent of Herod the Great, who took the city and ruled as a client king for the expanding Roman Republic. Within 3 decades, Rome fully annexed Jerusalem into the province of Judea, governing it directly. During the early Roman occupation in the 1st century CE, the population of Jerusalem swelled to between 70,000 and 100,000. While the majority were Jewish, a small but increasing minority had converted to a new sect that arose in the city following the ministry and crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth. Consequently, Jerusalem became the cradle of the nascent Christian faith, with apostles disseminating Jesus' message and founding the first churches. Jerusalem's position as a nexus of worship brought complications. Roman officials, practicing paganism, perceived both Judaism and the emerging Christianity as threats, leading to the suppression of religious customs. In 66 CE, the Jewish populace rebelled, igniting the Great Revolt. Jerusalem was the heart of this uprising and thus bore the brunt of Rome's brutal counterattack. After a 5-month siege in 70 CE, Roman legions retook and devastated the city to crush further resistance. The Second Temple was burned to the earth, leaving only its massive retaining walls. A surviving section, now called the Western Wall, remains a sacred site for Jewish prayer. Post-destruction, Jerusalem was reconstructed as the Roman colony Aelia Capitolina, with Jews explicitly barred from entry except on specific holy days. This triggered another Jewish revolt in 132 CE, which Emperor Hadrian ruthlessly crushed. He further Romanized the city by building a temple to Jupiter on the site of the Jewish temple. With the Jewish expulsion, the city became a hub of Christian worship. Emperor Constantine the Great, a Christian convert, dispatched his mother, Helena, to identify the location of Jesus' crucifixion. The site she selected was occupied by Hadrian's Roman temple. This was demolished, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was erected in 335 CE, becoming the focal point for Christians in the city. By the 5th century, while the Western Roman Empire faded, the Eastern Byzantine Empire maintained control of Jerusalem for nearly 3 centuries, championing it as Christendom's holiest site. However, a new power and faith were about to make their mark. The rise of Islam in the Arabian Peninsula in the early 7th century opened a new chapter. The city quickly acquired sacred status for Muslims, believed to be the destination of the Prophet Muhammad's night journey. Following Muhammad's death in 632, the Rashidun Caliphate spread Islam across the region. In 638, Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab marched his forces to Jerusalem, capturing it from the Byzantines. Under Muslim rule, the city enjoyed a period of religious tolerance where worship was permitted for all. The Caliphate allowed Jews to return, ending the ban enforced by the Romans and Byzantines. Under the Umayyad dynasty in the late 7th century, Jerusalem was adorned with two of Islam's most significant structures, the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. These additions elevated Jerusalem's status to rival Mecca and Medina and firmly integrated Islam into the city's identity alongside Judaism and Christianity. As the new millennium neared, this tolerance began to erode. In 969, the Fatimid Caliphate seized Jerusalem. While pilgrims were initially welcomed, the administration eventually imposed harsh restrictions on non-Muslims. In 1009, Caliph al-Hakim ordered the demolition of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, shocking the Christian world. Though later rebuilt, this act sowed deep grievances among Christians who felt their holy sites were under threat. Religious tensions were exacerbated by the Great Schism of 1054, splitting Christianity into the Roman Catholic West and the Greek Orthodox East. Jerusalem fell under Orthodox jurisdiction, irritating the Roman papacy. By the late 11th century, the Fatimids faced instability and lost Jerusalem to the Seljuk Turks in 1073. Seljuk rule brought disruption, and reports of pilgrims being harassed reached Europe.
The Seljuk threat to the Byzantine Empire prompted Emperor Alexios I to ask the West for aid in 1095. Pope Urban II reframed this plea as a call for a crusade to reclaim Jerusalem. Motivated by piety and promises of salvation, thousands of Europeans marched to the Holy Land. In July 1099, the First Crusade breached Jerusalem's walls, instigating a slaughter of the city's Muslim and Jewish inhabitants. The Crusaders established the Kingdom of Jerusalem, rebuilding the Holy Sepulchre in a Romanesque style and repurposing Islamic shrines on the Temple Mount for Christian use. Military orders like the Knights Templar and Hospitaller were founded to protect the influx of pilgrims. However, Crusader control weakened with the rise of Saladin, who unified Muslim forces and recaptured Jerusalem in 1187.
Under Saladin, Christian sites were largely converted back to Islamic use, though the Holy Sepulchre was left to the Orthodox Church. The loss of the city sparked the Third Crusade in 1190, led by Richard the Lionheart and Philip II, which restored some territory but failed to retake Jerusalem. Through the 13th century, control of the city remained a flashpoint. Despite dismantling the city's fortifications in 1219 to lower its strategic value, Crusades continued until the Mamluk Sultanate drove the last Crusader state from the region in 1291. Under Mamluk rule, the city stagnated but remained a pilgrimage site. In 1516, Jerusalem was absorbed into the Ottoman Empire. Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent rebuilt the city walls, beginning an era of relative peace where synagogues, churches, and mosques coexisted. However, over the centuries, Jerusalem faded into a neglected regional outpost with a population of merely 8,000 by the 19th century. As the Ottoman Empire weakened in the 1800s, European powers reasserted their presence, building consulates and churches. Simultaneously, European Jews fleeing persecution began emigrating to the city. By the 1860s, overcrowding within the ancient walls spurred expansion into new neighborhoods like the Russian compound and early Jewish settlements outside the old city. By 1882, 25,000 Jewish immigrants had arrived, altering the demographic landscape. The collapse of the Ottoman Empire following World War I saw British troops secure Jerusalem in 1917. The British faced a dilemma, having issued the Balfour Declaration supporting a Jewish homeland, while simultaneously promising independence to Arab allies. To manage these conflicting promises, the British established Mandatory Palestine. Between 1922 and 1947, Jerusalem's population exploded to 165,000, with tensions between Arabs and Jews boiling over into frequent riots. In 1947, the UN proposed partitioning the land into Arab and Jewish states, with Jerusalem as an international neutral zone. This solution failed to prevent war. Following the British withdrawal in 1948 and the declaration of the State of Israel, the conflict expanded. After bitter fighting, Jerusalem was divided, the west to Israel, the east, including the Old City, to Jordan. This partition only deepened the animosity, setting the stage for continued conflict throughout the 20th century. Despite global efforts to broker peace, the ancient struggle for control over this venerated city continues to evoke intense passion from all sides, perpetuating a conflict that remains unresolved to this day.